Working the night shift in a retail store can be eerie, but Sarah never imagined how terrifying it would become. She had been working at a large department store for a year when she started noticing strange things during her overnight shifts. The store, located on the outskirts of town, was quiet during the night hours, with only a handful of employees working to stock shelves and prepare for the next day. It was peaceful, until it wasn't. One night, as Sarah was stocking shelves in the clothing section, she heard the unmistakable sound of a shopping cart being pushed behind her. Turning around, she expected to see one of her coworkers, but no one was there. The aisle was completely empty, and the cart she thought she heard was nowhere in sight. Sarah brushed it off, thinking maybe she was just tired. But then, the sound started happening more frequently. Every time she turned a corner, it felt like someone had just been there, pushing a cart, whispering, or moving items. Her co-workers assured her the store was empty except for them, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. One particularly unsettling night, she decided to check the store's security cameras. To her shock, she saw what appeared to be a customer walking slowly through the aisles. The figure was wearing a long coat and moved methodically, stopping occasionally to look at the shelves. But there was something wrong. The customer's movements were jerky, unnatural, and as Sarah watched, the figure disappeared behind an aisle, never reappearing on the other side. Confused and frightened, she asked the security guard on duty to do a sweep of the store. But after searching every aisle, no one was found. From that night on, Sarah's shifts became unbearable. The sounds of carts and footsteps followed her everywhere she went, and the strange figure would occasionally appear in the corner of her eye, only to vanish when she looked directly at it. One night, while closing up the store, she heard the sound of a shopping cart again. This time, it was louder, closer, and unmistakably real. She turned, heart racing, only to find an old, rusty shopping cart slowly rolling toward her, on its own. Terrified, Sarah fled the store and quit her job the next day. She later learned that the store had been built on the site of an old shopping plaza that had burned down decades ago. Several people had died in the fire, including a customer who had been trapped inside. Sarah now wonders if the figure she saw was one of the lost souls, still shopping, forever trapped in the store. Mallory had just started her new job at a boutique clothing store, and she was excited to finally have a steady income. The job was easy enough, folding clothes, helping customers, and keeping the fitting rooms organized. But after her first week, Mallory noticed something strange about the fitting room area. Whenever she was alone, she would hear faint whispers coming from behind the closed fitting room doors. At first, she thought it was just customers talking quietly, but when she checked the rooms, they were always empty. The whispers were soft, almost like a conversation happening just out of earshot, but there was no one there. One afternoon, after a particularly busy day, Mallory was closing up the store by herself. The fitting rooms had been a mess all day, with clothes strewn everywhere, so she took her time cleaning them up. As she stood folding clothes near the fitting rooms, the whispers started again. This time, they were louder, more insistent, as if whoever, or whatever, was behind those doors wanted her attention. Mallory's heart raced, but she forced herself to continue working, determined not to let her imagination get the best of her. But then, one of the fitting room doors creaked open. She froze, staring at the now open door, her pulse quickening. The room was dark, and though she couldn't see anyone inside, she felt the overwhelming presence of someone, or something, watching her. Summoning all her courage, Mallory stepped forward and pushed the door fully open. The room was empty. She quickly turned to leave, but as she did, the whispers grew louder, more frantic. It was as if they were coming from all around her, echoing off the walls. Mallory bolted from the fitting rooms and ran to the front of the store, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She told her manager about the incident the next day, but they shrugged it off, saying the store was old and sounds carried strangely in the building. But Mallory wasn't convinced. Over the next few weeks, the whispers continued, growing louder and more frequent. One night, as she was closing the store alone again, she heard a voice, clear as day, whisper her name from one of the fitting rooms. Chilled to the bone, she grabbed her things and left, refusing to go near the fitting rooms ever again. She later learned from a co-worker at the store had once been a morgue, and the fitting rooms were built where the cold storage units used to be. It seemed that some of the former occupants had never left. Dan had worked at a hardware store for over 5 years. The store was old, with creaky floors and dim lighting that gave it an eerie atmosphere. But what made it even creepier was the rumor that the store was haunted by its former manager, Mr. Wilkins, who had passed away suddenly years before. The staff often joked about seeing strange shadows or hearing footsteps when the store was empty, but Dan never paid much attention to the stories, until one fateful night. It was a late evening, and Dan was closing the store by himself. The other employees had already left, and Dan was locking up the back room when he heard a loud crash from the front of the store. Thinking someone might have broken in, he grabbed a flashlight and hurried to the front, only to find a pile of tools and boxes scattered across the floor. No one was there. As he bent down to clean up the mess, he heard footsteps behind him, slow and deliberate. Dan stood up, flashlight in hand, and turned to see if anyone was there. The store was empty. The footsteps stopped, but the air felt heavy, charged with a presence he couldn't explain. He shook off the feeling and continued cleaning, but the strange occurrences didn't stop. Over the next few weeks, Dan began to notice items moving on their own. Tools would fall off shelves, doors would slam shut without warning, and the temperature would drop suddenly, even on the warmest days. One night, as he was closing up alone again, Dan heard a voice call his name from the back room. It was deep and gravelly, unmistakably male. Dan's blood ran cold. He cautiously made his way to the back, his heart pounding in his chest. When he reached the back room, he found the door wide open, something he had locked earlier. Inside, the lights flickered, and Dan could feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind him, trapping him inside. Panicking, Dan tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. That's when he heard it, a low, rasping voice whispering his name again, but this time, it was right behind him. He turned around, shining his flashlight into the dark corner of the room, but no one was there. The whisper came again, closer now, sending chills down his spine. "Leave," the voice growled. Dan scrambled for the door, pounding on it until, finally, it swung open. He ran out of the store, not stopping until he was safely in his car. The next day, Dan quit his job, unable to shake the feeling that something sinister was lurking in the store. He later learned that Mr. Wilkins, the former manager, had died of a heart attack in that very back room, and some believed his spirit still haunted the store, making sure everything was in order. Retail jobs can seem mundane, but for those who've experienced strange and disturbing encounters, they know there's more happening behind the shelves than meets the eye. These 3 stories of the phantom shopper, the haunted fitting room, and the manager who never left serve as a chilling reminder that sometimes, the spirits of the past refuse to move on. Next time you're working a late shift, be mindful of the strange sounds and eerie presences, because you never know who, or what, might be watching.